So, good morning to you all. Prime Minister Minnis, ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure to be back here at the University of the Bahamas. This used to be a standard feature for me, this class. I actually taught this class in the spring of 1988 when Felix Bethel, who was the predecessor to your present lecturer, was the class lecturer. He had gone off to Canada to do his PhD, and I was invited to fill in for the 3 months that he was away. And Michael Halkitis and Reynard Rigby were both members of that class, and you now see they've gone on to become quite successful. Halkitis is now a minister of the government, so there may be hope for you yet. So thank you again for the invitation on a topic which is quite dear to me. And if you look in the newspaper of 1994 on the front page of The Guardian, just before Queen Elizabeth's last visit to the Bahamas, there was a statement from me calling for a republic for the Bahamas. So this is a topic which throughout my political life I've supported, I still support, but I need to add a caveat at this point because I'm one of the King's ministers and I'm not engaged in sedition or treason by suggesting an overthrow of the monarchy. But in the democratic traditions of our country, to simply say that it's time for constitutional change, largely because I believe it is time for us to have a Bahamian head of state, and that it's time to move on to that. As a practical matter, the distribution of power, the execution of power will not change by switching to a republic and a Bahamian head of state. But for all kinds of emotional reasons, it's better to be connected to someone who represents you, a Bahamian. It's hard to imagine that Prince William wakes up in London and says, as he's eating his cornflakes, I wonder what my subjects in the Bahamas are thinking about today. So, having said that, it's also important for you as a generation to embrace where the country actually has to go. And this would be a constitutional change of this kind of fundamental nature would be something which would be important for you to embrace because you may want to change the way power is distributed and how it's executed. For example, you may want to take the opportunity to create an elected Senate instead of an appointed Senate. You may, in fact, want to abolish the Senate altogether and go to a unicameral legislature instead of having bicameral legislature as we have. So small changes of that nature. But the main change will be you will have a president instead of a governor general as the head of state, and that person will not be a representative of the Queen, but will be a representative, or the King, will be a representative of you. So the monarchy is power comes from the monarch and descends down to the people. The republic is power with the people and goes up to the person who's the elected head. And people get frightened by the idea of a republic because the first thing they say is, oh, we're going to become like Haiti. But they don't also realize that the republic, the one shining republic next door to us, is the United States of America. And then the question is, what is the power distribution? Do you have an executive president, or do you have someone with nominal powers so that you separate the executive from the ceremonial aspects of a head of state? And if you do that, you pick up on the Trinidad model. So Trinidad has a separation between the ceremonial and the executive. So all they did was they rewrote the Constitution, and wherever Governor General appeared, they just put president. And then they elect the president after the general election is done, the party in power then gets to appoint who is the Governor General by a vote in the House of Representatives or the House of Assembly, as it would be the case in our country. Now, people think that when you turn to a republic, that this is going to solve many of the issues of how power is balanced in the country. I've come to believe after a generation of being in public life in our country that in a sense, it doesn't matter what kind of system you have, because at the end of the day, it's who runs the systems and whether people behave in the fashion that the system predicts. So all the institutions are there in the Constitution of the Bahamas today. It's just a question of how the bodies, the people who operate in those functions, perform those functions. So some farmers in the 18th century decided they didn't want the British to be their overlords anymore, and they designed a constitution which they said has checks and balances. The question you have to ask yourself is, those farmers wrote this constitution and they wrote it in longhand. And what they did, there's a book by Sam Huntington called Political Order in Changing Societies. And what he points out is that after the so-called revolution in the 1700s, there was supposed to be this fundamental change. But if you look at the constitution that the farmers designed, they actually copied the exact same constitution that they left behind in Britain, except they substituted president for king. So when you look at the institutions, the way they work almost exactly the same as the Parliament and the king operated in the 18th century in the United Kingdom. And you see that operating today. So that when you look at all the rulings by the courts, the actions of the head of the executive, the responses of those in the legislative arm, essentially they've all given deference to the executive. And the complaint is the system of checks and balances actually working? So that's why I've said you have to understand that no matter what institutions you actually create, it's whether or not the individuals in those institutions carry out the functions which those institutions require, the integrity which the institutions require. So that's essentially where I am on this matter. And I also have to add this caveat at the end, which is that I don't speak as a policy maker for the Bahamas government on this, because the Bahamas government supports the existing order and the Constitution. So I've just been asked in the context of this class to say those things about my personal opinion and views on the question of a republic. And of course, it's up to your generation, I think, to take the matter forward. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your remarks.